I want to share with you guys out of the Word tonight a little bit. We've been talking about this idea that in this world that we live in, that there's a lot of people, because they've grown up without fathers, because they've been literally fatherless, and when they come to Scripture and they come to God, they begin to hear about this idea of a father, and they just can't relate. They can't figure out what this looks like. They can't figure out what this father would look like in their life. And so for the last few weeks, we've been looking at the scriptures that talk about Jesus and how Jesus came to show us what the Father looks like. That Jesus literally is the one that came and said, though you may be confused about what your Father looks like or what he acts like, or you may have some kind of confusion because of what you've seen in this world, Jesus said, let me clear everything up. Look at me and I will show you who the Father is. Last week we read a lengthy passage of scripture where Jesus was talking to his disciples, and he was laying out a lot of different things, and in it he was relaying to them messages of hope that he brought from the Father. And many of these messages that he shared, we talked about last week quickly. Jesus said that there is more than enough room in the Father's house for you and for me. That there's more than enough room, that you don't have to be worried about there not being enough room for you, even though you may have experienced being left out in this life. Jesus said, the Father wants you to know that there's more than enough room for you. Jesus went on and he said that he wanted us to know that the Father will not abandon you as orphans. We talked last week about how many of us come from broken families where we've experienced a mom or a dad walking out on us. And how inside we know what abandonment feels like, and it shapes our entire view of our world. How everything we see, we have to see with a buffer of safety that we put up around us, because if I get too close and you walk out, I can't handle that kind of pain. And so we guard ourselves, and Jesus comes with a message and he says, I'm not like your dad, I'm not like your mom, I'm not like your brother or your sister or your friend. I will never abandon you. Jesus brings that message tonight. Jesus brought the message that anything that you ask in the Father's name or in Jesus' name, he will give you. We talked about what that means, the responsibility that comes when Jesus says, if you ask for it, I will give it. And how it isn't just some flippant thing. It literally is, Jesus says, everything that is mine, I give it to you. I'm holding nothing back. I'm not going to hold back the things that I have, but everything that I have now becomes yours. Anything you ask in my name, I will do it. And there's a lot that goes with that, and there's a lot of responsibility that goes with that we talked about. But the biggest thing that we talked about last week was the final message from Jesus, and he said that he is going to give you a gift, and the gift that he gives is peace of mind and heart. And how we live in a world where peace is hard to find, contentment is hard to find. To have peace in your mind, have peace in your heart is really something that people will go to great lengths to find. People realize, I've been there myself. I know many people have been there where they chase after this and this and this, and they catch it. They actually get what they were chasing only to find that it didn't give them what they thought it was going to give them. Now what? Now where do you go from that when you've made some money, when you've got a little fame, when you go and you do the things that you thought was going to give you the peace? You've got the girl, you've got the guy, you've got a house, you've got the kids, you've got all these things, and all of a sudden, what is still missing, none of these things can give you. Where do you go? Jesus says the message from the Father is that the gift that he brings is not like anything that this world has ever experienced before. The peace that he gives. And so tonight, we're going to pick up right there, and I want to share with you a story that is very, very special to our heart, because this is a story that we recite over and over and over again, because this is a story that we relate to so much, and it's found in the book of Luke in chapter 15, and I'm going to read you part of this story tonight, starting with verse number 11. Jesus is in the middle of talking to a group of people, and he's trying to convey a message that God cares about things that get lost. He's talking about a woman who's lost something in her house and how she's looking everywhere for it, and she's looking for this coin that she's lost, and she can't seem to find where it went. He tells a story about a sheep that wanders off from the pack and how Jesus says, we're going to go after that sheep. That sheep is valuable. That sheep is important. Nobody gets left behind. Everybody counts. Everybody matters. And then Jesus says, let me tell one more story just to drive home this idea that your Father cares about things that are lost. To illustrate the point further, Jesus tells this story. A man had 2 sons. The younger son told his father, I want my share of your estate before you die. So his father agreed to divide his wealth between his sons. A few days later, this younger son packed all his belongings and he moved to a distant land. And there he wasted all his money in wild living. About the time that his money ran out, a great famine swept over the land and he began to starve. He persuaded a local farmer to hire him, and the man sent him into his fields to feed the pigs. The young man became so hungry that even the pods that he was feeding to the pigs looked good to him, but no one would give him anything. When the man finally came to his senses, he said to himself, at home, even the hired servants have food enough to spare, and here I am dying of hunger. I will go home to my father, and I will say, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I'm no longer worthy of being called your son. Please take me on as a hired servant. So he returned home to his father, and while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. His son said to him, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I'm no longer worthy of being called your son. But his father, he said to the servants, quick, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. Get a ring for his finger and sandals for his feet, and kill the calf that we have been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast, for this son of mine was dead and has now returned to life. He was lost, but now he is found. So the party began. In this story that Jesus shares about this son that is lost, it starts off with a very interesting thing, because the story starts with a scenario that every single person in this room deals with. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're old, if you're young. Every single person in this room deals with this scenario that Jesus is talking about in this story. And the scenario that I'm talking about, it sounds like this. I'm not happy where I am. I want something else. I'm not happy here in this place in life that I currently find myself. There must be something else out there that'll give me what I'm looking for. I'm not content with what's going on in my world. I don't like the way I feel about myself. I don't like the things that are going on. I don't like my certain situation with the family that I got, with the friends I got, with my current financial situation. I don't have enough money. I'm always worried about it. I know I've got to change something because what I've got right here isn't enough. I want something else. Anybody relate to that feeling at all? Yeah. So this story starts with Jesus describing 2 sons, and he starts off by saying, son number 1, he looks at his father and he says, Dad, what you got going on here in your house? I ain't digging it. I need something else. So why don't you give me the finances that I know you've got tucked away somewhere so that I can be on my way, because I'm going to go find what I know will make me happy. Because what I've currently got in your house is not making me happy. I am not content here. I need to go over there. And as Jesus begins to tell this story about this son, he is not describing a one-time event. And this is where a lot of people read this story of the prodigal son and they think, oh, this is a story of somebody who wanders away from their faith. And they go out into the world and they get caught up in sin. And this is where a lot of people get the term backslidden. They're like, oh, I'm backslidden. I was right here, but now I've kind of like fallen backwards. Kind of like we're all climbing this hill, and if we don't keep on trying, we're just going to slide backwards. And let me tell you, there's no such thing as backsliding. We're walking forward. Jesus says there's a path, and it's narrow, and it's hard, and it's straight, but it's a path that we're going. And even when you think you're going backwards, trust me, there's a shepherd in your life that is not going to let you go backwards. Even when you think you are, he knows exactly where you are, and he's still taking you where you want to be, even when you think you're not. So Jesus tells a story, and we think, oh, it's a one-time occurrence. This kid wanders off and goes and learns some hard lessons, and he comes back. Okay, big deal. No, this story describes a cycle in your life. It describes a cycle in my life. This describes a mindset of somebody who loses contentment with where they're at, and they think, I'm going to go find it somewhere else. I'm living here where God's got me, but this is not cutting it. So I've got to go over here, and I've got to take matters into my own hand, and I've got to make this happen for me because this just isn't going to give me what I think I need. And this cycle that Jesus is playing out in this story, it's all about somebody that gets lost. And the heart of the Father saying, even when you think you're gone, you're not gone. Even when you think that you're far from home, you're not far from home. This cycle that plays out in our heart, this cycle that plays out in our life, it happens sometimes. I've seen it happen in the course of a day in my life. I wake up in the morning and I'm just miserable and thinking, I've got to change everything. And by the time the nighttime comes, I'm repenting on my knees going, God, I'm so grateful for everything in my life. You are amazing. Sometimes this wandering away and coming back can last a year. Some of my good friends, it's been going on for many, many, many years. Going out and trying to figure out what it is that I'm really searching for. Going out and trying to figure out what it is that I really want to find. Really, when you think about it, this story is all about living a life of substitution. It's a life of substitution. See, we're talking about peace of heart and peace of mind that Jesus says he will give to you, but we can't seem to find the peace, and so we have to substitute it with something all the time. So let me substitute it with a little money. Let me substitute it with a little sex. Let me substitute it with a little bit of accomplishments. That's one that works really well in the church world because it's so squeaky clean and sanitary. I'll just work really hard and do a lot of really good things, and I'll feel better about myself because I've accomplished so much. You're trying to substitute what it is that Jesus wants to give you, but you have to stay in the Father's house in order for him to give it to you. The moment that you leave and say, I've got to go out and I've got to take it into my own hands, is the moment that the Father begins to long for your return, and he cannot wait to be reunited with you. But make no mistake about it, you have left the place that the Father has created for you to live in your life. Last week we learned that Jesus says, I'm going to prepare a place for you. My Father and I want to make a place for you. We want to live there with you. We want to dwell with you. We want to have a house and a home with you. And you never have to leave. A place for you that you never have to depart from. A place that never has a landlord that says you got to move like my family had to do this week. Moving sucks. Has anybody moved recently? Oh my gosh, don't even get me started. There's never a place where you get that phone call that says, you gotta go. So this story of this kid, he leaves home. We see it played out. He goes and he spends all the money. It's all gone. All the friends are gone. All the good times, they've all been had. And now what is he gonna do? What happens is he has his, what we call rock bottom experience. He bounces off the bottom of the deep end and he's just like, okay, life cannot get any worse than it feels right now. All my friends are gone. Everything isn't how I want it to be. I don't know what to do. Do you know what happens in that moment? Do you know what begins to transpire in that moment of him hitting rock bottom? It doesn't say it in the story, but I can tell you without a doubt because it's happened to me when I've been in his shoes. He began to hear a voice. He began to hear a voice of Jesus saying, there's room for you in the Father's house. You don't have to stay here in the pig pen. Here's a picture of your Father. This is what he looks like. He's right there with you. Jesus is right there with you saying, I know you feel like it can't get any worse and you'll never be able to get back what you've lost, but look at the picture of your Father because he wants you to know that there's still a place for you. The story says that the man comes to his senses and he begins to talk to himself. And I love this because this is a lie that he has believed, that you and I believe too. And the lie that he begins to believe, that he tells himself, is, I am no longer worthy of being called your son. Just take me on as a hired servant. I've gone too far. I've done too much. There's no way that I could be worthy of being called your son. The son believed that because of his wrongs, there was no more room for him in the Father's house. He had gone too far. He had crossed too many lines, and his time had come, and he was going to have to be put out. These are the thoughts that he began to believe, and these are the thoughts that you and I wrestle with, because you and I know what it looks like to experience sitting at the table, experiencing the blessing of God, only to back away from it and to walk out the front door and to go somewhere else, not because we want to, but because we know how to, because it's familiar to us, because it's instinct, because we just end up there. And in that moment, we begin to hear the lie that says, you could never go back because if you did, you wouldn't be accepted like you were before. You've done too much. It's too late for you. But even in that lie that he was hearing, he began to experience hope that says, no, I know my Father's heart will at least let me sleep with the servants. I know he'll at least let me have some kind of place. He probably won't bring me into the house. I know he probably won't give me a place like I had before, but he's not going to leave me out in the cold. And as the son goes home, probably expecting what any son should expect when they've done what he did, he expected the father maybe to punish him, maybe to lecture him. I'm good at that with my boys. I told you so. Maybe he expected the father to withhold his love from him. Maybe he expected him to shame him for what he had done. These are all things that he could have expected as an appropriate response for the thing that he had done. But the response that he got was none of those things. It says that the father looked for him, and the father ran to him. He saw him coming, and the father embraced him, and the father threw a party for him. Trip on that for a second. The son knows what he's done, and he's expecting to have to pay the price for what he's done. That's fair, right? That's fair. That's what should happen. You don't get a party thrown for you when you've gone and done wrong. You don't get a party when you've taken your father's hard-earned money that he probably slaved over his whole life. You don't take that and go and throw it away on partying. You don't come home and have him throw you a party. And yet that's what the story says that Jesus wanted for us to understand about the heart of our Father. That's the heart that Jesus says, let me show you. You got all kinds of confusion going on about what your father's really like. You don't really know what he's really like because you think he's pissed. You think that he's holding a grudge. You think he's keeping score. You think that he's going to get you because of what you've done. Let me tell you, that's not the picture. So Jesus says, I got to tell you these stories because you're not getting it. Here's the story. The story is that you have blown your life. The story is that everything that you were given, you've used the wrong way. You've squandered it all. The story is that we do it continually over and over again. Some of us are the most hard-headed people I've ever met, right? It's like we just don't learn easy. And yet Jesus says, in spite of that, your Father has a heart that wants to throw a party for you when you come home. He wants to throw a party for you. It's crazy. So I ask you tonight, because many of us know this story. We talk about this story all the time because many of us, like I said, we own this story, man. This is our story. Many of us in this place are coming to the realization, and we're coming to the spiritual place in our life where we don't want to go back out there anymore. Like we're realizing the pig pen, that's not a place I want to hang out anymore. Like I am not okay with this cycle of coming home to the Father's house and then going back out and then coming back and then going back. I don't want to live this way anymore. It's not the way I want to live. Some of you aren't quite there yet, but trust me, you will get there because God is a faithful Father and He parents His kids and He's going to grow you up. But some of us are there where we're just like, how do I get off of this treadmill? How do I get off of this cycle? I'm glad you asked. Last week, in the scriptures that we were reading, Jesus is laying out all of these messages to you and me, and he's talking about the heart of the Father. And right in the middle of it, he lays out something really, really beautiful, really important. I want to read it to you again. He says these words in John 14, verse 21. Last week we read this. Jesus says, "Those who accept my commandments and obey them are the ones that love me." Those who accept my commandments and obey them are the ones who love me. These are the words that Jesus said last week, and he said it a few different times and in a few different ways. He talked about this idea of demonstrating love through being obedient to what he asks of us. How many of you guys have ever said these words to your kids, or have ever had somebody say these words to you if you're in that category? Do it because I said so. Yeah. Has anybody ever said, because I'm the dad, that's why. Because I'm the mom, that's why. Do it because I said so. You know what you're really getting to when you hear those words is you're dealing with a child who doesn't want to do what they're being asked to do. Son, please take out the garbage. Okay, Dad, I heard you. 2 hours later, the garbage hasn't moved. Son, please take out the garbage. Earbuds in, not listening. What's going on in this situation? Has the son heard the message, take out the garbage? Of course he's heard it. The youth said no. I heard that, Seth. I'm just kidding you. I'm sorry. The son has heard the message, take out the garbage. What's really going on? The son doesn't like the message, right? He heard it. He just doesn't like it. It's not what he wants to do in that moment because what he's got going on YouTube is way more important than taking out the garbage. It's not a matter of him hearing the message. It's a matter of he doesn't like what he's hearing. This is what's talked about in the scripture over and over and over again about how Jesus categorizes people into two different groups. And he uses lots of different analogies to prove his point. Those two different groups are those that hear him and do something with what they hear, and those that hear him and don't do something. Jesus tells stories about the man that builds a house on a sandy beach or on a rock. He's like the guy that hears and actually does something with it. His house is built strong, and when the winds and the waves from the ocean come and they beat against that house, it stands strong. The guy that doesn't do what he's heard is the guy that's building his house on the sea, right on the sand, and when the waves come, it just washes all of his hard work away. Jesus says you can be smart or you can be foolish. And it all has to do with what you do with what you hear. He uses lots of stories to prove his point. And so in this tonight, as we're talking about this prodigal son, Jesus is talking about a son who says to his father, I don't like where I'm living, and I don't like my conditions, and I don't like your house, and I don't like your rules. I don't like the scene at all. Give me my money so I can go find a different place, because something out there is calling my name, and I know it's what I want. And so the son leaves, and the son goes and finds what he's looking for, only it leaves him wanting, and he's not happy, and he's not content, and he begins to think, man, my dad has what's really going on. I need to get back to where my father's house is, because at my father's house, I know he will take care of me. And the son comes to his senses and he comes back. And as this cycle plays out over and over in our lives, and as we go back out and then we come back in and go back out and we come back in, we say, enough's enough. I don't want to do this anymore. What is it that's going to stop? And right in the middle, Jesus says, those who accept my commandments and obey them are the ones who love me. Right in the middle of this cycle, going in, going out, going in, going out, Jesus says, if you want to stop this cycle in your life, it's very simple. You have to listen and obey. You got to listen to what's being said, and then you have to act on it. You have to do something with it. In the book of Psalms, I love the book of Psalms. I'm a musician, and so I feel it. In verse number 97, it says these words. The psalmist says, "Oh, how I love your instructions." There's a lot of us in this room that don't like taking instruction. True story. Read this for yourself. Let this become your prayer. Oh, how I love your instructions, God. I think about them all day long. Your commands, they make me wiser than even my enemies. Your commands are my constant guide. Yes, I have more insight than my teachers, for I am always thinking about your laws. I am even wiser than my elders, for I have kept your commandments. I have refused to walk on any evil path, so that I may remain, what? Obedient to your word. I haven't turned away from your regulations, for you have taught me well. How sweet your words taste to me. They are sweeter than honey. Your commandments give me understanding. No wonder I hate every false way of life. No wonder I hate every false way of life. I don't know about you guys, but there comes a point in your life where you just don't have time for the nonsense. You don't have time for the stuff that just doesn't make sense. You don't have time for the things that just don't work in your life anymore. You don't have time for the things that at one time in your life you had a lot of time for. Things start to change. I'm done with a false way of living. I don't want to waste my life doing something that is temporary. I don't want to waste my steps. I don't want to waste my decisions, my efforts, my finances, my everything, doing something that's not going to last, that's not going to be around, that's not going to give me what I really want. I want my heart to say to God, God, I love your instructions. Even when I've got my earbuds in on the couch watching YouTube and I don't like what you're saying, God, I want to love your instructions, and I want to get up, and I want to go over, and I want to pick up the garbage can, and I want to take it out. Not because I necessarily like that, but because I trust that if you're asking me to do it, there is purpose in it. If you're asking me to do it, there's a reason behind it that I can't see yet. If you're asking me to do it, you're trying to teach me something. Any of you guys old enough to remember the first movie, Karate Kid? Not the cheesy remake, the good one? Wax on, wax off, paint the fence, the whole 9 yards. You get to the end and you know the whole thing. That kid didn't like the instructions Mr. Miyagi was giving him, right? There was purpose in what he was doing. I want to read you guys a text. I'm going to have the band come on back up, and we're going to worship, and we're going to respond to God. But I want you to listen to this text message that I got from one of our brothers this week. He says to me, so after 1,324 days in recovery, and after 2 full years, after God put it on my heart to start and to finish the 12 steps, I have fulfilled my step work and I've completed it. That being said, I am now ready to be intentional in my walk with Jesus and my journey in recovery. I knew that this was a requirement to complete before I could really work with others. I feel at peace with my walk and my newfound joy to serve others. God is on the move. I got that text this week from a brother because he heard from God many times, hey, go take out the garbage. And I knew because I was talking to him that he did not want to go take out the garbage. But something clicks inside of your heart when you finally come to the place of being willing to surrender and you begin to understand a deeper truth. I hear people say all the time, I love God. How many of you in here, if I were to say, how many of you love God? You would raise your hands, you'd say, I love God. I love God. What if I were to tell you that the way that you demonstrate your love for God is through being obedient to Him when He says something? Obedience to God is how you show God you love Him. Obedience to His word, obedience when He leads you, obedience when He deals with your heart, obedience to when He speaks to you. As a parent, you don't want to waste your words. You don't want to talk to the air when you're trying to communicate with your kid. You don't want to be ignored. You don't want them to just disrespect you and just go, I don't want to hear anything you have to say. The process of growing up in our faith, and we talk about the process a lot because we start off as babies. This process of growing up, it leads to a place where we willingly say yes when God says go. We willingly say, I'll do it even if I don't know how it's going to work out. We willingly surrender our will, as Jesus said to his Father, I don't want to go to the cross, but it's not about my will, it's your will be done, Father. When we come to that place of surrendering our will to his will, he begins to show us the beauty and the love and the blessings of living in the Father's house. He shows you all that is available for you there. Close your eyes. Let's open up our hearts to God right now. If you're here tonight in this place and you're feeling something because of maybe some of the music that you heard tonight, because of some of the scriptures that you saw up on the screen, because of somebody that talked to you out in the front of this building tonight when you got here, God does what he does through thousands of different ways. He wants to love you right where you're at, and he wants to teach you, and he wants to show you that there's nothing that you can possibly do that will ever keep you away from his love. And there is nowhere that you can possibly go that is too far away to where the Father says, I will leave you out in the cold. He says, I've got room for you. I've made a place for you. Come home where you belong. And for some of us here tonight, God is saying, come home. It's been long enough. You've been doing it your way long enough. You're not getting anywhere, and it's not giving you what you thought it would. Call it a day and come home where you belong. There is peace for you. There is love for you. And all it requires is you humbling yourself, saying, God, I don't want to live for myself. I don't want to sin and live for the temporary things of this world anymore. I want to turn and I want to follow after Jesus. I want to know you. Say this simple prayer. Just say, Jesus, I receive you into my life right now. God, I believe by faith that you came for me, that you died for me, and that you rose again for me. Jesus, I surrender to you. Fill my heart with your Holy Spirit right now. Count me as one of your sons and daughters. Bring me into your family. Bring me into your kingdom. Teach me how to walk with you. Lord, I pray for every heart in this room right now. I pray that as they're hearing these words, God, they would recognize that they're not Jason's words, but they are their words, heartfelt words. And I pray, oh God, that you would save us tonight in this room.